Okay, so we're in part 51. So we've only got one more, and next week it'll be Brother Bushy, and then I'll be back the week following, I believe it is. Okay, so yeah, I will be here the week following. Okay, so the fall of ancient Babylon would refer most commonly to the Persian conquest of the Babylonian Empire founded by Nebuchadnezzar in 627 BC. So this is 627 is a pretty interesting year because that was also the beginning of Jeremiah's ministry. He started in 627, just around there. And so it's very interesting in that light. And King Josiah was also king at that time. And so you had this man, Nebuchadnezzar. He's the father of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, and you've heard of Nebuchadnezzar the second. Okay, well, Nebuchadnezzar is his father. This empire would end, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar, 627 BC, in just 66 years. Okay, Cyrus the Great would suddenly capture, and by the way, if you do the math, okay, it ended in 539, but actually the empire of Babylon started in 605 BC. Okay, but Nebuchadnezzar was the one that started the empire itself to grow into the world empire of Babylon. Okay, so Cyrus the Great would suddenly capture Babylon and end its long-standing political dominance in Mesopotamia. Babylon fell in October of 539 BC after Cyrus's forces, and that's king of Persia, defeated their army at the Battle of Opis. This Persian victory broke Babylon's back. So that ended them. Persian troops soon entered the city of Babylon with little resistance. So we think, oh, was it really kind of like Nineveh? No, it wasn't actually. It was different. No, they entered Babylon with little resistance. Nabonidus's chronicles describe a swift, largely bloodless takeover of Babylon. The Persians entered likely by exploiting lower river levels of the Euphrates River. King Cyrus made his entry into the city soon afterwards and was hailed by many of its inhabitants, according to cuneiform sources. Nabonidus's chronicles does emphasize the peaceful surrender of the city and Cyrus's acceptance by the people. Years later, Xerxes the first destroyed the fortifications of Babylon in 481 BC. So it wasn't just like that and Babylon was destroyed. It was that way with Nineveh. Okay? This is a different thing. So I just want you to understand that. So fortifications. So how many years later is that? You know, that's quite a few years later. That's about 50 years later. All right? The Persians then removed all the statues for the patron Babylonian god Marduk. How many have heard of Marduk? We talked about Marduk, but unless you study scripture and the archaeology surrounding it, you wouldn't know anything about Marduk. But he was, everybody back in those days knew about Marduk. Okay? And then they damaged his temple. This was the big central temple in Babylon. Greek historians Herodotus and Xenophon described a dramatic night assault involving a diversion of the Euphrates River so that the Persian troops could enter under the walls. So, okay, so what caused Babylon's fall then? Okay, well, there were multiple internal and external factors that had weakened Babylon before the Persians took it over. At the time of the initial fall in 539 BC, the Babylonians currently had an unpopular king named Nabonidus. So that was the king at 539. He said, I thought he was Belshazzar. We'll get to him. There was also those who promoted the moon god Sin, what a fitting name, huh? Over the Babylon's chief deity Marduk. This angered the priests of Marduk, obviously. Nabonidus spent long periods of time away from the city, leaving the governance to his foolish and debauched son Belshazzar. Now you know about Belshazzar, right? Because we read about him in the book of Daniel. He wasn't the main leader. Nabonidus was, but he had alienated the elites of Babylon. His religious and political choices had created widespread discontent among its citizens. Civil unrest and religious discord would continue to grow. Does that sound familiar? It's very interesting how history will repeat itself. Babylon's population and its priesthood grew increasingly hostile to its ruling dynasty. The Persians were strategically brilliant. King Cyrus had already conquered Media and Lydia, and then he turned towards Babylon with a well organized campaign. The book of Daniel, among other prophets, predicted the fall of Babylon as a divine judgment, famously depicted in Daniel 5 at Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Babylon fell in, excuse me, start again. Persia fell in 330 BC to the Greeks. So the Babylonians fell in 539. The Persians fell in 330. So they went another 200 years and then they fell to the Greeks. Okay, to the Greeks. Babylon then became the capital of eastern Greece. So Babylon was still around. Yeah, that's right. Yet around 305 BC, Seleucus, a Greek king, he was the king of the Syrians, of Syria, but he was Greek, just like the Ptolemies were over the Egyptians. They were Greeks. So Seleucus, a Greek king, founded the capital of Seleucia north of Babylon on the Tigris River. Alexander the Great died in Babylon not many years before. But moving their capital north to Seleucia was likely a shift away from Babylon. And it was motivated by strategic and administrative considerations. And because of this, Babylon was soon reduced to a crumbling ghost town. Later, the Seleucid capital was moved to Antioch. You know where we talk about Antioch in Syria? Where's Antioch? Well, that's on the Mediterranean coast, isn't it? So it moved to Antioch in the early 200s BC. After the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, this caused the Seleucids to gain territories in Syria and Asia Minor. They then founded Antioch at the mouth of the Orontes River, which became the new western capital of the Seleucids. Therefore, by 250 BC, Antioch became the primary capital of the Seleucid Empire, reflecting the political importance of the western Mediterranean facing territories, because that's where everything was moving. It was moving west. So what happened to Babylon? What was left behind? So what was the aftermath of Babylon's fall? Well, the initial fall of Babylon brought the end of the empire of Nebuchadnezzar. That happened in when? 539 BC. Babylon became a part of the Persian Empire at that point, which introduced policies of administrative tolerance and allowed the exiled people, including the Jews. It wasn't just the Jews that were returned to their land, but there were many nations that had exiles in Babylon, and Cyrus gave them leave to go back to their land. But that included the Jews to return home to Israel. Even though Babylon was politically subdued, it remained a major cultural and religious center for centuries. Yet, after the Greek Seleucids abandoned it as its capital of Seleucia, they went to Seleucia, or they made Seleucia actually, Babylon was left to ruin. And now it is mainly buried under the sands and bogs of southern Iraq. And it would all be buried if it wasn't for a man named Charles Koldewey. Come in. Yeah, come in. Can somebody let her in? Yeah, just let her in. Yeah. And come in. You're welcome. Yeah, of course it is. Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. We're talking about Babylon. Please take a seat. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what was the animal? Okay, so we talked about the Greek Seleucids. Even though Babylon was politically subdued, it remained a major cultural and religious center for centuries. Now, okay, so what I was talking about was the work of Charles Koldewey. Koldewey was a German archaeologist. He went to Babylon, and he has the record of moving more dirt than any archaeologist that's ever been an archaeologist. I mean, he basically dug out Babylon or part of it. He didn't dug out the whole city because the whole city is huge. I mean, if you've ever seen, there's a video that Joel Kramer did that I've been passing around, and he actually did some work. He went to the site in southern Iraq, and he looked at it and the walls and everything like that, and it's a huge place. But Koldewey spent years, I mean, from like 1890 to about 1914, when World War I came out, Koldewey couldn't do it anymore, so he had to leave. But he had moved so much dirt, and he covered that where the Ishtar Gate, if you heard of the Ishtar Gate, it's very famous. Okay, the Ishtar Gate, and there was like a royal processional entrance into Babylon. He uncovered that, and they took a lot of the artifacts and put them into the British Museum. There are also in other museums, the Babylonian artifacts, and a lot of that was done by Koldewey. He's the one who was the one, and I don't think they're doing really any archaeology in Babylon now. Of course, we heard of what Saddam Hussein did. Of course, he wanted to rebuild that Babylon and make it a capital, but of course that never worked out. Okay, so I'm digressing a little, so I better get back to this. Okay, so we talked about the fact that today it's buried under the sands and bogs of southern Iraq. But then we want to talk about Babylon's symbolic legacy, okay? In later Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, Babylon has become a symbol of imperial arrogance and moral decline. So interesting. Hence, this is why we see Babylon symbolized in the book of Revelation as the final corrupt economic, religious, and political system that God will finally destroy forever. And so, and this is the book of Revelation. So it's very interesting that we could even see it symbolized in the world economic, political, and cultural system where they're trying to make a one world government. The same idea. So it's very interesting. But really, what this chapter is referring to is the destruction of this actual Babylon, this ancient Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar. So, all right, so let's look at verse 1 and 2 as we go into this. Okay, so verse 1 and 2, a destroying wind will come to destroy the city of Babylon. Okay, so let me read those verses to you. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up against Babylon and against them that dwell in the midst of them that rise up against me a destroying wind, and will send upon unto Babylon fanners that shall fan her, and shall empty her land, for in the day of trouble they shall be against her round about. Okay, so, yeah, we can get her done. So, here, okay, here we have a metaphorical wind of rumors, and like, you ever hear the They have a lot of hot air, I think that's me, a lot of hot air. Okay, but this is a metaphorical wind of rumors and news that will necessitate the fall of Babylon. So this is very interesting. Okay, this one. So fanners are those who will fan a threshing floor on a steel day. That's what they called fanners. So a lot of, when we look at the Bible, many times it's related to an agricultural society, because back in those days, most of the economics work that was done in the world was done on the agricultural level. Okay. Nowadays we have technology, we have tech, don't we? And that's like something that people work on today. But back in those days, they didn't have anything like that. Okay. And so really, a lot of them were just farmers. I mean, it's just a farm community. So fanners are those who will fan a threshing floor on a still day so they can blow the worthless chaff away from the harvested wheat. All the fruitlessness of Babylon would eventually blow away and be no more. That's what that means. So at first there'll be like a real big wind that will come and cause Babylon a lot of trouble. But later on, when it gets becalmed on the threshing floor, the fanners will come with these big fans and start blowing. So it's what it's saying is it's necessitating the destruction of the city of Babylon. So he's using these metaphors to describe what is going to happen to Babylon. Okay. And by the way, it's very interesting. I wish I could take you all to Iraq, and you could see the ruins of Babylon, and then you would go, "Wow, this huge city! It's as large as like Chicago. I mean, it's huge." And it's been destroyed. It's been razed to the ground exactly. And so this is the prophecy against Babylon, and now you can actually see that it happened. Okay, it really did. And so that's the thing about it. Okay, so now you're talking about the fanners, but then you go into the winnowing. Now, to winnow is to separate the wheat from the chaff. So when winnowers threw the mixture into the air. So, okay, so let me see if I can illustrate this for you. So you've got all the kernels of the wheat. So we're doing a wheat harvest. A threshing floor would be on top of a hill because you get the free wind on the top of the hill, right? So the idea was you would take a winnowing fork. You ever heard of a winnowing fork? Maybe you haven't, maybe you have. If you were in the farming community, you'd know it right away. A winnowing fork it looks like a rake, basically, with very thin spines on it, and they would take it and like that into the wheat. Now the kernels of wheat would have this husk on it, known as chaff, and they have to take the husk off the wheat in order to grind it into flour. So what they would do is they go, and then they go like that. They throw it in the air, and when they threw it in the air, the wind would catch the husk, and it would just throw it away. And that's what winnowing is. Okay? So this is what God's saying. He's saying Babylon will be like that chaff that floats away. And that's very interesting because you can tie that into the book of Daniel that also talks about a vision of Nebuchadnezzar, or a dream that he had, where that exact thing happened, where he watched the world empires blow away like chaff. So that's very interesting. Um, because chaff is worthless. So Babylon would be blown away like chaff in the wind. In Matthew chapter 3, verse 12, John the Baptist said that Jesus would separate the wheat from the chaff. So once again, you have this illustration, and many times we don't understand them because we don't live in a farming community. So we read it and we go, "What does that mean?" Because we don't know, because we don't have that knowledge. It's not nobody's fault. It's so it takes a little study to understand where the Bible's going on this. Okay, so now let's look at verse 3 and 4. Babylon will not have an army to defend them. So this is the problem. That's a problem. When you have an empire and you don't have an army to defend your empire, how are you going to defend it? You're not. So against them that bendeth, let the archer bend his bow. That's artillery. And against him that lifteth himself up in his brigandine. Now, you say, what's a brigandine? Brigandine is armor. So you can say brigandine, armor. That's what it is. Brigandine is armor. And spare ye not her young men, destroy her utterly all her host. Thus the slain shall fall in the land of the Chaldeans, and they that are thrust through in the streets. Well, they had a battle, didn't they? And they lost. The Babylonians lost. And so this is the prophecy of the destruction of Babylon's army. So that means that no longer would there be any military help to defend them. Now remember, Jeremiah wrote this many years before Babylon fell. You know, I would say Jeremiah wrote this around 597 BC, and Babylon fell in 539 BC. So how many years is that? That's over 50 years. That's like 70 years, isn't it? Something like that. I don't have my calculator for me, so I can't tell you. But that's what you're looking at. You're looking at a prophecy that says the Babylonians' army is going to fall. How do you know that, Jeremiah? Well, it's the word of the Lord. It's God's word. Okay? They wouldn't be there to defend them. All right. So then verse 5, God had remembered the captivity of Israel and Judah. So this is an interesting verse because now you get into the captivity of Israel and Judah. For Israel hath not been forsaken, nor Judah of his God. The Lord of hosts, though their land was filled with sin against the Holy One of Israel. Okay, so God never forgot his covenant with Israel. He never forgot. He made a covenant. We call this the Abrahamic covenant, but he doesn't forget it. And remember, these people were sent to Babylon to be exiled, and now they are returning to their land. So that's the covenant of Israel. So the army of Babylon is destroyed. The covenant is not forgotten. God had noticed the sin of the Babylonians and their foolishness against him. He saw all that. And now in verse 6 or 7, Jeremiah declared for the Babylonians to flee. So he's saying, don't even stay. You need to go. Now, once again, this is written many years before, but when they saw the trouble coming, the Babylonians needed to flee. So here you go, verse 6 and 7. Flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. Every man for himself. In other words, be not cut off from her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. In other words, he will get his vengeance. They will pay for us. Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand. Now that's a very interesting phrase there because that refers to Revelation 17. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you can circle that, and we don't have time to go to Revelation 17, but there it is. And that made all the earth drunken, and the nations had drunken of her wine. Therefore, the nations are mad. The what? Oh, iniquity. And okay, good question. Iniquity is the result of somebody being disobedient. So you're disobedient to God, which we call sin, and iniquity is the cause of it. It's the result of it. It's how the sin breeds and causes trouble in other people's lives, not just in your own life. That's what iniquity is. Okay? So it's like cause and effect. So you do the cause and then you have the effect. And the effect is like I plant a seed in the ground and then it produces many more seeds. So the sin is the seed, the iniquity is the plant coming up and producing hundreds of seeds from the plant.
Consequences of what you do.
Right, it's the consequences. It's the end of it. Yeah, and right, what you reap, you got the verse right there. And notice it says the nations are mad. So this is another thing that it's caused the madness of people because of the sin that has come into Babylon. So the people should leave with their lives. Come out of her, my people. Really. How many Babylons would follow God's call? We have a similar plea in the book of Revelations, chapter 18, which further symbolic Babylon will turn into a confusing world system filled with evil. Oh, wow. People will be, earmarked for destruction. So if you go to Revelation, book of Revelation, chapter 14, verse 8 through 10, also chapter 18, verse 3, if you get a chance, maybe write those verses down. You can go to the book of Revelation. You can see a parallel fulfillment, not only in ancient times, but also in modern times. The nations have indeed become mad over the cup of modern Babylon. Drunkenness is rife, and the madness and anger is real. As it was then, so we can see it today. And that's because history ends up repeating itself. You know, we talk about the two lessons of history. The first lesson is we never learn from history. And the second lesson is history ends up repeating itself because we didn't learn the first lesson. Okay, so now in verse 8 and 9, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. So here it is. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand, and that made all the earth drunken. So now we're getting into a larger situation, all the earth. Okay? So this is pointing to a future event, and this is how prophecy is. It'll talk about something in the present, something in the near future, and then many times something in the far future, because from the time that was written, 697 BC, to today, that's over 2,500 years. Actually, it's over 2,600 years, isn't it? So that's a long time. And how would God know all that? Okay. So the nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her, take balm for her pain. If so be she may be healed. So Babylon was standing, but on the next day it fell. So it just seemed like everything is fine, and then boom, it was gone. Such is the case for all who live away from God. Prayer was made for Babylon, but she had gone too far. Now she was earmarked for destruction. So everyone should flee from her, or they would be taken with her in her own destruction. Her sin was shouted up to heaven, and God knew it. Okay. And this is just, when you get into this passage, it becomes really amazing because it's so applicable even to our time. So in verse 10, a beautiful promise was given in the middle of Babylon's destruction concerning God settling his glorious kingdom. Okay, so now he's jumping around a little bit and gives us a beautiful promise. The Lord hath brought forth our righteousness. Come, let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord our God. That is the gospel, our righteousness. How on earth did God bring forth our righteousness? Well, he brought it forth by sending his son to this earth to die on the cross for us. Amen. Jesus came to this earth to die on a cross for our sins. He rose again on the third day. He ascended to heaven. He sits at the right hand of the Father. He's interceding, and he uses people like me to present the gospel to those who need Christ, to need him to save them from their sins. And I'm thankful that there was a day when I came to Jesus Christ and asked him to save me. And I was a mess when I came to Jesus, and that was 42 years ago. But I accepted him, and he changed my life. So God was working, and he is still working. It's a very, very powerful verse. So in 11, verse 11, 12, Babylon therefore should prepare for war. Okay, so we're talking about war now. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, the Medo-Persians, for his devices against Babylon, to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. Set up the standard upon the walls of Babylon. Make the watch strong. Set up watchmen. Prepare the ambushes. For the Lord hath both devised and done that which he spake against the inhabitants of Babylon. All right. So here you have it. God is taunting them. He's taunting them to prepare shining arrows and shields. He says, get out your best. Get out your best arrows and get out your best shields, Babylon. But the Medes would be coming against them. And we talked about that battle at the beginning of our study that happened in 539. No, it was before. It was a different battle. Let me see if I can find it again, because I didn't memorize the name of it. Hold on. It's called the Battle of Opis. Okay, that was the big battle that he's talking about him, and he says, "All right, get ready, prepare your shining arrows and shields, because Medes are coming." And they have joined forces against them. And God allowed this. The Medes would destroy Babylon. God would have his vengeance since they destroyed his temple in 586 BC. They destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, the first temple, the temple of Solomon. They could plant their flag on their walls. That's fine. They're standard. They could they could call for a watch and prepare for attacks from the enemy. Yet God was against them, against Babylon. You know, the king of Persia had allied himself with Babylon to destroy Assyria's capital, Nineveh, in 612 BC. He did that. Yeah, the king of Persia. But later, the Medes joined Persia to defeat Babylon itself in 539 BC. Nineveh's demise was quick and violent. It was very quick. There was so much anger against Nineveh, and that was a larger city than Babylon. Nineveh was bigger than Babylon. Babylon's huge, but Nineveh was larger than Babylon, and they destroyed it. They razed it to the ground. They were so angry with Nineveh. Babylon's demise would be slow and painful. So which is worse? Which is worse? Well, that's a debate. But in verse 13, God here was broadening his prophecy to include the modern global Babylon of today. So verse 13, O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, thine end is come, and the measure of thy covetousness. So he says, your end, you're finished. Yeah. So this age will come to its end as well. And I talk to people, whether they're Christians or not Christians, they'll tell me there's something that's going to happen to this world. There's something coming. People know. They know. You can't carry on like we're going in the world today and not something to be an answer for it. All the crime and the trouble and the heartache that's going on in the world will come to an end. And the Lord He will bring that. And so that's why we need to ensure that we're with Him. Okay, so in verse 14, the Lord promised by his own name that Babylon would be filled with droves of soldiers that would eat up their harvest as a caterpillar would destroy a grapevine. So verse 14. The Lord of hosts has sworn by himself, saying, Surely I will fill thee with men as with caterpillars, and they shall lift up a shout against thee. So it's like eating up a vineyard. The caterpillars eating up a vineyard. That's the picture that is given here. And he says, that's what's going to happen to you. The soldiers are going to come in and they're going to eat up everything you have because they need food. Amen. And that's how they get their food. They just loot. They just take it. Okay, in verse 15 through 19, who is God in contrast to man then? So God's asking. He says, okay, you're going to contrast God to Marduk. Okay, all right. So verse 15 through 19. He, or God, hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and hath stretched out the heaven by his understanding. When he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings with rain, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasuries. No human does that. Only God does that. Every man is brutish by his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. For his molten image is falsehood. Anything that is not God is falsehood. And there is no breath in them. They are vanity, the work of heirs. In the time of their visitation they shall perish. The portion of Jacob is not like them. For he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. So this is God's proclamation. So God made the earth by his power, and he formed the universe. These things did not form by chance. No. He is the one who brought forth the vapors with his voice. It is he that created the vapors of lightning and rain. It is He that forms wind that blows. Humanity, he says, is brutish. That means ignorant. It really does. In comparison to God. The creator of a false god is confusion, and they worshipped a lie. The idols cannot breathe, so why should anyone worship them? They are empty folly, and those who follow them are in error. When Babylon would fall, these people would fall with it. Yet the land of Israel was not like them, and God would set up his kingdom and rule with his rod forever. And here we have a contrast. He is the one who has an eternal name. His name is Jehovah of the heavenly armies, the Lord of hosts. The Lord of hosts. So, so it is foolish to follow man, the man-made idols, rather than the true God. It would be easy to think that things that we see and touch will bring us more security than God. But objects rust, they rot and decay, yet God is eternal. Why should we put our trust in something that will disappear within a few short years? Why not put our trust in the God who never changes? So in verse 20 through 23, as we get through this, God shared the sovereignty for his use of Babylon. God's sovereign. Thou art my battle axe and weapons of war, for with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee I will destroy kingdoms, and with thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider. Those are like the tanks of the ancient times. And with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider, and with thee also will I break in pieces man and woman, and with thee will I break in pieces old and young, and with thee will I break in pieces the young man and the maid, and I will also break in pieces with thee the shepherd and his flock, and with thee will I break in pieces the husbandman, and that's the great vineyard, and his yoke of oxen, and with thee I will break in pieces captains and rulers. So God says, look, it, you fight against me. It's a losing thing. You're not going to win. You're going to lose. So Babylon was God's battle axe. They were used to destroy ancient nations that were earmarked for destruction. They were broken in pieces with their armies and cities. I, I want to mention these ancient kingdoms. I was just in Jordan. I was just in Israel. I mean, I saw the remnants of some of these ancient kingdoms, okay? And so here you have it. Syria, Kedar, Elam, Phoenicia, Philistia, Ammon, Moab, Judah, Edom, Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, Lydia, among others that had fallen under the fist of Babylon. Babylon ruled the world for 66 years, but they soon fell to the Medo-Persians. 66 years, that's all they did. 66 years. That's not long compared to the Medo-Persians and the Greeks, really, and even the Romans. I mean, you look into the history and you're like, wow, that's not long. And yet, all this was done. I mean, we went through Jordan. We went through the land of Moab. We went through the land of Edom. There's no Edomites down there. There are no Moabites. There's no Ammonites. They're gone. We flew into Ammon. That's what's named after the Ammonites. Ammon, it's in Jordan. There are no Ammonites to greet me. They're gone. They're all gone. Okay? Babylon was God's battle axe. All right. So in verse 24 through 26, but the Babylonians had taken everything too far. Okay? How are we doing on time? I have so much to go through. I may have to do a part two. I may have to do a part two. Let's try 10 more minutes and see how I do. Okay. So they had taken everything too far. All right. And I will render unto Babylon and to all the inhabitants of Chaldea all their evil that they have done in Zion in your sight, saith the Lord. Behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyeth all the earth. And I will stretch out my hand upon thee, and roll thee down from the rocks, and will make thee a burnt mountain, and they shall not take thee a stone for a corner, nor a stone for foundation, but thou shalt be desolate forever, saith the Lord. And so interesting, if you look at the archaeology of Babylon and where it is today in southern Iraq, the ruins of Babylon, they don't use the building to build anything. The Babylonians basically used mud brick anyway. And a lot of that was melted in the bogs of the Euphrates River. Because the river's right next to it. And so if you can imagine, there's there's water underneath, there's a water table, and that's been buried down on that water table. And a lot of that's been dissolved. Babylon is just like dissolved. They're not building anything from the ruins of Babylon. They're not using it as a quarry. Okay, it's just not happening, and it didn't happen then either. And God says it. He says it right there. It's really really interesting. Okay, so where am I here? Um, oh yeah, okay. So so Babylon had caused so much destruction to the people of Judah, they had showed little or no remorse. They had stirred up the people as just as modern Babylon will stir up the world against it. Their foundation stone would be taken away forever, and they would become desolate upon the earth. Okay? So that's what I have from there. So let's go to verse 27 through 32. Now I'm going to cover a few more verses. I'll try to explain them as we go. I'm not going to go too fast. I don't want to confuse you. I'd like to answer your questions if you have any. Okay, God taunted them to raise their flag and sound their alarm. Okay, verse 27. Set ye up a standard in the land. Blow the trumpet among the nations. Prepare the nations against her. Call together against her the kingdoms of Ararat, Minni, and Ashkenaz. Appoint a captain against her. Cause the horses to come up as the rough caterpillars. This is taunting again. Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And the land shall tremble and sorrow, for every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. The mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. They have remained in their holds. Their might hath failed. They have become as women. They have burned her dwelling places as bars are broken. One post shall run out to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to show the king of Babylon that his city is taken at one end, and that the passages are stopped, and the reeds they have been burned with fire, and the men of war are affrighted. So he's seeing this in vision. He sees all this. Okay? So God's taunting them again. And how many years before this actually happened? 70 years before it happened? God's taunting them then? Because God knows the end from the beginning. He knows everything. He knows exactly what would happen. So he gives history before it happened. That's what prophecy is. So there you have it. Okay?
Is verse 27 the actual the people that are going to come in and destroy Babylon?
Yes. Yes. Well, those are actually their allies. He says, call for them. He says, but the Persians are going to come, and he calls them Medes. Okay, but the idea was they could assemble the best of their army. They could ready their battle against the Medo-Persians, yet they would be destroyed and no one would be around. The people who were filled with anxiety should stay in their fortresses and hide. They would be in confusion in their sorrowful messages, one after another. Every road would be closed, and the people would see fire and destruction. So, it was ready, okay? It was time to thresh Babylon. Now remember the threshing floor? Okay, so we talked about the winnowing, right? And you go like that, and the husk falls off the grain. Well, there's a thing called threshing, and the floor is called a threshing floor. Okay, winnowing is one thing, threshing is another. Okay, so let's look at verse 33 with that in mind. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor. It is time to thresh her. Yet a little while, and the time of her harvest shall come. And it won't be a good harvest, by the way. It's an evil harvest. Babylon's evil harvest was ready to be threshed. Soon the harvesters would arrive. Grain would be threshed on the floor, where the sheaves. So the grain starts with a sheaf. They have like a, I don't know if you've watched, them harvesting wheat, but they'll take like that fork, they the side, and they'll cut the sheaf, and then they take the sheaf and they pile it up, and they put it in a stack like that, and then they take the stack and they would put it in a wagon. Now this is the way they did it in ancient times. Of course, they don't do it that way now. But in ancient times, this is what they would do. They would put it in the wagon and they would take it to the threshing floor. And the first thing they would do is they would throw all the sheaves down and spread them out. And then they would get something to go over it. Okay? They were brought, so what they would do is the stalks of grain would be crushed to separate the kernels from the stalk by a wooden tool. So sometimes they would beat it with a tool, a wooden tool, and that would that would loosen the stalks from the grain. Then the winnowing would come in after that, but then they would remove all the stalks and throw them away. As soon as the grain would leave the stalk, there was no more need for the stalk, so that would be junk. Okay? So they would separate the kernels from the stalk with a wooden tool. Sometimes a sledge was pulled over the grain by animals to break the kernels loose. Sometimes they had a sledge go over it, and they would break it that way. And that's how they did it. Babylon would be trampled and crushed like a grain was crushed on a threshing floor. God would judge them for their sins. So once you understand what threshing is, you can start to understand what the Bible is saying. So in verse 34 through 35, Nebuchadrezzar had crushed and devoured Judah. So that was the king who destroyed the temple in AD 586. Okay, I'm trying to remember. All right, so let's go on here. So, hold on. Yeah. So Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me like an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicacies, or delicates. He hath cast me out. All right. So that's not good, is it? How are we doing on time? Yeah, we're going to. Oh, is that the prayer list? Oh, yes. Yeah, well, if we do that, then we have to do the whole thing. Are you sure? Can you do another 15 minutes? What do you think? I'll move quickly. Okay, let's see how we do. Okay. All right. So here we go. Babylon. Okay. All right, let's start again. Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon. It's actually in the Aramaic, so it's Nebuchadrezzar. That's in Aramaic. The king of Babylon hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. God's speaking like this. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out. The violence done to me and my flesh, and to my flesh, be upon Babylon. Shall the inhabitant of Zion say, and my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea shall Jerusalem say. Okay, well, thanks for coming in. Okay, all right, and come next time. All right, what's your name? David. Nice to meet you, Charlotte. Yes, 7 o'clock. You're welcome. All right, Charlotte. Thanks for coming in. Okay, so Babylon had tried to swallow God's work like a beast of prey, and as a fierce dragon, Babylon had enjoyed its delicate lifestyle. They had cast out things of God out of the land of Israel. Okay, so verse 36 through 44. But Babylon would mourn over their own fall. Okay. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will plead thy cause and take vengeance for thee. I will dry up her sea and make her springs dry, and Babylon shall become heaps. Now let me ask you a question. What does that mean? If we lose all the water? What's wrong? Okay, so what does that mean if we lose all the water? What should we call that? A drought. And what would a drought cause? Yes. Yeah. A dwelling place for dragons, an astonishment and hissing without an inhabitant. They shall roar together like lions. They shall yell as lions' whelps. In their heat will I make their feast, and I will make them drunken, and that they may rejoice and sleep a perpetual sleep, and not wake, saith the Lord. I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams with the goats or the he goats. How is Shishak taken? How is the praise of the whole earth surprised? How is Babylon become as an astonishment among the nations? The sea is come up upon Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. Her cities are a desolation, a dry land, and a wilderness, a land wherein no man dwelleth, neither doth any son of man pass thereby. And I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he has swallowed up, and the nation shall not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. Okay? So that's long scripture there to tell you that famine would come. The ruins would be the result. It would be heaps. Doleful creatures would inhabit it. People would look at the destruction and be astonished. They would be like hungry lions who would cry out. They would sleep and never wake up. They would die like little lambs before the butcher. People would cry and lament over her fall. A statement in verse 41 can be likened to the fall of modern Babylon. The cities would be empty and desolate. Desertification, I can't say it, desertification would set in. No one would want to live there or make a point to pass by and look. And that's basically the way it is today. Babylon would be punished over their false god, Bel. Everything that has to do with Babylon would fall into the dust. Okay? All right. I think we can move pretty quickly now. We find an event accomplished by the Persians who took Babylon by surprise after they diverted the Euphrates River upstream. The Persians then walked beneath the city's fortifications on a dry riverbed, and they took the city. Jeremiah was saying that Babylon would be deprived of their life-giving water. Unlike Jerusalem, Babylon would never be restored. Their agriculture depended upon almost entirely on artificial irrigation because southern Mesopotamia received under 200 millimeters of rain every year, about that much, not much, okay? Babylon was a desert. When irrigation systems failed, through a canal collapse, flooding, salinization, silting, the canals would get silted, labor shortages, or administrative breakdowns, crop failure would definitely result from all these things. So Bel was referring here to Marduk, the patron god of Babylon. Bel just means God or Lord, okay? And their Lord was Marduk, who they worshipped. So in verse 45 and 46, my people, go ye out of the midst of her, and deliver ye every man his soul from the fierce anger of the Lord, lest your heart faint, and ye fear for the rumor that shall be heard in the land. A rumor shall both come 1 year, and after that in another year shall come a rumor, and violence in the land, ruler against ruler. So the people would depart from Babylon to take refuge elsewhere. They would see how angry the Lord was against Babylon. They should not lose heart, even though it would be a time before everything would come to pass. They should go. They really should. It's a warning. This prophecy is a warning.
But he wants the people of Israel to leave.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he does. And because they were staying, they said, "Oh, we've got good times." No, the days were coming for God to unleash His judgment upon Babylon. Okay. Therefore, behold, the days come that I will do judgment upon the graven images of Babylon, and her whole land shall be confounded, and all her slain shall fall in the midst of her. Then the heaven and the earth and all that is therein shall sing for Babylon. For the spoiler shall come unto her from the north, saith the Lord, as Babylon hath caused the slain of Israel to fall, so Babylon shall fall by the slain of all the earth. Ye that have escaped the sword, go away, stand not still, remember the Lord afar off, and let Jerusalem come into your mind. So this is the call of the Jews. Because you see, everyone would be confused in Babylon, and many would die. So it wasn't the place to live. Maybe at the time it looked good, but the future was bad. The universe would be glad for the fall of Babylon, for it would be great, especially for the future Babylon. They would receive for the trouble that they had caused. Trouble. Trouble would come for those who caused trouble in Israel. The Jews should now return to their land. They should go home. Okay? There's nothing more left for them there. Babylon would be spoiled or would be looted. It's very interesting that we're living in a day where all these Jews are going back to their land, to Israel. Why are they doing that? Because they can't dwell in any other land. There's nothing left for them. This way it was then. Isn't it interesting how history repeats itself? Okay, so verse 51 through 53. We are confounded because we have heard reproach. Shame hath covered our faces, for strangers are come into the sanctuaries of the Lord's house. Wherefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will do judgment upon her graven images, and through all her land the wounded shall groan. Through Babylon should mount up to, though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet from me shall spoilers come unto her, saith the Lord. So the people would be confused and destroyed because they had caused themselves shame. Okay? They had caused themselves shame. And these people were strangers in the house of the Lord. God would likewise judge their false God. And he's talking about his people. He's talking about the Jews. They would groan from their wounds. It did not matter how great Babylon fortified herself, for the looters will still come and they'll take away everything. So the people were paralyzed with their guilt over the past. They were paralyzed. The Babylonians have desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. And some of the Jews were ashamed to return to Jerusalem. But God told them to return because he would destroy Babylon for their sins. By the way, it worked. Verse 58 through 58, 54 through 58. We're getting close to the end. The sound of a cry cometh from Babylon, and great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans, because the Lord hath spoiled Babylon and destroyed out of her the great voice. When her waves do roar like great waters, a noise of her voice is uttered, because the spoiler is come upon her. Even Babylon and her mighty men are taken. Every one of their bows is, and every one of their bows is broken. For the Lord of God of recompenses shall surely requite, and I will make drunk her princes and her wise men, her captains and her rulers and her mighty men, and they shall sleep a perpetual sleep and not awake, saith the Lord, saith the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, this is Jesus. The broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire, and the people shall labor in vain, and the folk in the fire, and they shall be weary. There is destruction everywhere. There was destruction everywhere. The city was looted. The looter came, and her mighty men were gone. Bows of war were broken. God was being repaid. He was repaying the Babylons for what they did. Gates would be broken and burned with fire. What was done to others was done to them. And I don't have time to tell you all that means. But let's look as we finish this and get to the end of the chapter. If the people thought Jeremiah was an ancient of Babylon, they were terribly wrong. Okay? They were terribly wrong. He's done pretty well with time. The word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah, the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, whom he went with Zedekiah, the king of Judah, unto Babylon in the 4th year of his reign. And this Seraiah was a quiet prince. So Jeremiah wrote in a book all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. And Jeremiah said to Seraiah, when thou comest to Babylon, and shalt see and shalt read all these words, then shalt thou say, O Lord, thou hast spoken against this place to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but that it shall be desolate forever. And it shall be when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it and cast it in the midst of the Euphrates. And thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. And then the chapter closes. So these last two chapters, okay, prove otherwise. Jeremiah was not an agent of Babylon, was he? No. The oracle given in chapters 50 to 51 was given to, very likely, to Baruch's brother Sariah. He was to read these words. I thought it was Baruch, and I know I probably said that in previous studies, but actually, as I studied this and came to chapter 51, I came to understand that it was actually Sariah. And he was to read these words before the royal court of the king. He would pronounce imprecations of doom against Babylon. Then he would take the scroll, he would tie it to a large rock. So if you imagine the scroll, here's the scroll. He just read it in front of the court of the king. Now he goes out to the Euphrates. He takes the scroll, he takes a big rock, okay? He ties it to the scroll, and he goes and he throws it. He just goes, whoo, and throws it in the middle of the Euphrates River. And he then declares that Babylon would fall and never rise again over the evil that God had spoken against it. Jeremiah had spoken against Babylon. Jeremiah himself, he would never visit Babylon. He would not visit Babylon. So he sent the message with Sariah, who was an assistant to the king of Judah. Okay, that's who he was. And it now appears that both chapters 50 and 51 were sent with Sariah. So because it says here, all the writings, give it to Sariah and go to Babylon and read it to them. Okay? So, in this last of Jeremiah's messages, we find again the twin theme of God's sovereignty in his judgment. Babylon had been allowed to oppress the people of Israel, but Babylon would be condemned. Although God would bring good out of evil, he would not allow evil to remain unpunished. The wicked may succeed for a while, but we should resist the temptation to follow them, or we may share in their judgment. That's the lesson. And I mean, please, if you get a chance, maybe I can, but there's a guy named Joel Kramer. He's an archaeologist, and he does a really good video. It's called Expedition Bible, and there is a piece. It's about 22 minutes long, where he actually goes to the ruins of Babylon. You need to watch that because it will really open your eyes to understand what's going on here. I know I've given you a lot of material, and I've taken more time than I usually do, but I've given you a lot of material so you can understand together what's going on here. That this is a judgment to a city that was amazing. I mean, it was incredible. And it was reduced to rubble, and it was a slow period of time. Even during the times where the Muslims would go to that area, they say that there were still some buildings left, but most of it was covered with the sands of the desert. The desert sands just came in. The river changed its path from that time. Everything changed. But the city's gone, and they've not rebuilt it. They have not. All that's left is the parade ground, and I don't think they're going to uncover anything else because it's in the bog. They can't uncover it because it's in a bog. They go down to where it is. It's just water. You're getting a bog, so you got to drain it. Got to drain it. Well, anyway, thank you for watching and listening. We're